My current job is just to write about this topic. Well, I'm zigzagging back and forth. I started out in the bureaus of the Seattle Times, then I moved downtown, covered general things. Then I was a tech reporter. I covered Microsoft. I was a tech columnist, editorial board. And then 2 years ago, the publisher asked me to edit what we call our Save the Free Press initiative, which is a public service initiative to raise awareness of the journalism crisis, the local journalism crisis, and to advocate for various solutions. Those solutions include legislative things that are happening in Congress and legislative things that are happening in Olympia. They're happening in other state houses as well. Ultimately, we'd really like to see federal support for the industry. And I know that gets people's hackles up. There was discussion of this in the report. When I was asked to do this, I always thought, stay the heck away. Government, keep your hands off the press. Absolutely. That's still the case. But as I learned more about it, I realized that actually the federal government has been supporting the free press in the United States since the United States was formed, really. It began in 1792 with the Postal Act being created in large part to be sure that the citizens and the voters in our experiment in democracy were informed. It provided a subsidy to distribute newsletters and newspapers out in the hinterlands to be sure that democracy would work. And there's basically been subsidies like that ever since then. It still rubs people the wrong way. We're very aware of the separation of government and the press, but I don't think you can find any significant evidence that support for the local press has caused undue influence or anything like that. In fact, there's a great argument by a former FCC commissioner. We ran a column a couple of years ago by this person, Mr. Minnow, and he argued that actually it's part of the First Amendment responsibility of the federal government to ensure that we have a strong, robust press system. I mean, our system doesn't work if we don't have informed voters and if we don't have the community bonds and everything else that local news provides. And I think, a lot of the problems we've had in the last few years in this country and the division and the hostility that we have and the inability to reach consensus on things really can be traced to the steep decline in the local news media. Now, there are lots of reasons for that decline. Some of it obviously is just technological disruption. The industry didn't evolve and change as quickly and as well as it maybe could have. But the newspapers, small and large, are all doing a pretty good job of adapting to digital realities. We're all digital newspapers nowadays, if you look around. But it's really hard, especially considering what we see as unfair competition right now between the newspaper industry and a couple of big tech platforms that pretty much all the advertising revenue that used to support local newspapers, if you look at the charts, it's pretty much all gone to Google and Facebook right now. More power to them. We love those companies, but we need to figure out a way to have a better, healthier relationship and maybe a little bit more fair competition. So at the federal level, the way to address that is through a bill called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, which would allow newspapers to collectively bargain with the big platforms. If you look at other digital media, music, books, all these things became digital. There were new policies, copyright rules, and things that allowed those industries to get paid basically when their material is used online. Newspapers are going through that same transition, but we're a little bit stalled right now. And so we're really, think about how digital music, 20 years ago, everybody was just downloading and stealing music online for free. It took some legislation, some copyright changes, and changes in our behavior to realize, we really need to pay for music. We don't pay for music. The people that create it and publish it are going to go out of business, and this is important to us. So let's figure out systems to subscribe and pay for this online. I think that's where we are with news right now. It's important. We all know how it's important. The 50 people on this call all know how important local news is. And the trick now is to figure out how can we be sure that there's a sustainable way to keep this industry going, that it's the people that are benefiting from it online are paying for it, And that's going to be a long cultural and legislative process, but I appreciate the work that you all have done to help us along. We're also seeing state efforts. The report details a lot of those. I can give you a little bit of an update on what's happened, I think, since the report was published. There is a proposal right now, that was hearing last week, on extending the state B&O tax exemption or preference for local newspaper publishers. Since 2009, the state of Washington has provided a reduced B&O tax rate for newspapers. That was created during the last recession because when newspapers were really struggling. And the idea was to kind of give them a hand and help preserve jobs. It isn't that unusual. The state has hundreds of different tax preferences like this. Thousands of companies in Washington state benefit from reduced B&O tax rates. The one for newspapers is going to expire next year. There was a proposal last year to just extend that. Now Attorney General Bob Ferguson and Senator Mark Mullet, who was on the video earlier, and Representative Jared Follett from Seattle have proposed extending it to 2035, reducing the B&O tax rate on newspaper publishers to 0, and also expanding it to include local digital news outlets as well. It's a bipartisan proposal. Seems like every time there's a public hearing, there's terrific support. Very little controversy. We shall see if it happens. It was expected to cost the state about $1 million a year. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. Perhaps the League of Women Voters will come to consensus and weigh in on that before the legislative session is over. That'd be terrific. Another big proposal on the table is to create a fellowship program through journalism schools, particularly Washington State University would coordinate it, and they would place graduating journalism students at local news outlets to help backfill some of the loss at local newsrooms. This is modeled on a program that California created last year. California dedicated $25 million to create over 100 such fellowships at local news outlets being coordinated by the University of California, Berkeley. That's just getting rolling, and the details of that are still kind of coalescing. I think Washington has an interesting opportunity to pursue a similar model. There are other things in other states. Oregon and Wisconsin have both considered tax credits for people who subscribe to local newspapers. I think that's really great. I like the idea of reducing the cost to get local news, because not only do we need to save the industry, we need to make sure that news is accessible. And as we're asking people to pay for it, we understand people have a lot of expenses, and we want to make news as widely available as possible. It's a little tricky in Washington because we don't really have we don't have an income tax or anything like that. So what do you credit against? So I don't know that that's going to fly here in Washington State, but it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on. There's also a federal proposal to provide $250, I think it was $250 or a year federal tax credit for which you could use to apply against newspaper subscriptions or donations to local nonprofit news organizations. That was actually co-sponsored by Representative Newhouse in Sunnyside, and I hope he's going to try again with that this year. We shall see. That one's called the Local Journalism Sustainability Act. It also had bipartisan support, and that's something we think would be really helpful. I can go on all day, but I will stop, and I'm happy to answer questions later on. And thank you all very much for this opportunity.